Definitely some marginal people early on in the campaign. There was an island of misfit toys, right?
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Donald Trump is in Manila today for a summit hosted by Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte, a strongman known for his populist message and disregard for the rule of law, who Trump seems to rather admire. We'll have more on that later. But first, here at home, new developments in the Russia probe have undermined a key defense put out by Trump allies that the people ensnared by the Mueller investigation are marginal figures in Trump world, nothing but coffee boys. Well, we now know that George Papadopoulos, whom Trump has called a low-level volunteer, made a foreign trip as a representative of the campaign. According to the BBC, he also edited a policy speech Trump gave in April of 2016, according to the New York Times. Papadopoulos was also in regular contact with campaign aide Stephen Miller when he was told that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. Papadopoulos has, of course, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI and faces prison time. Another supposedly marginal figure, Carter Page, repeatedly told campaign staffers about his meetings with high-ranking Russian officials. As the investigations creep closer to Trump's inner circle, Miller, now a White House senior policy advisor, has reportedly spoken to the special counsel's office. And Trump's longtime former bodyguard, Keith Schiller, told Congress that when Trump was in Russia for the 2013 Miss Universe pageant, a Russian businessman offered to send 5 women to Trump's hotel room. Schiller said he refused on Trump's behalf. And on Tuesday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions will be grilled in Congress about why his statements on the Trump campaign's Russia contacts don't match up with testimony by Papadopoulos and Page. The Russia investigation is getting closer to Donald Trump, and not for nothing, but it seems highly unlikely that his campaign was comprised entirely of coffee boys. And joining me now is Nayyera Haq, former State Department senior advisor, Aswin Suebasang, politics reporter at the Daily Beast, and Natasha Bertrand, political correspondent at Business Insider, along with Masha Gessen, author of The Future is History, How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia. Thank you all for being here. And Aswin, I'm going to go to you on this first because the Trump campaign, the Trump team, the White House team's defense has been that each of these people in turn, including Paul Manafort, who was campaign chairman, were simply marginal to the campaign.
Right.
Is this a defense that they're coordinating from inside the White House? Do you have any reporting on where they came up with this idea? Because it seems on its face to be ridiculous.
Well, this is certainly something that President Donald Trump himself has been trying to scream from the rooftops. And when it comes to someone like Paul Manafort, trying to call him a marginal figure is, of course, patently on its face absolutely ridiculous. He had the campaign for quite some time, and even before that, he was a key player in the campaign when Corey Lewandowski headed it. With someone like George Papadopoulos, their case is a little bit easier because technically they were correct. He was a minor figure, someone a lot of people in the campaign was a joke. Having said that, the degree to which the Trump campaign was run in a Bush League fashion made it possible for people like George Papadopoulos in their minor roles to sort of worm their way into coordinating with people in the top brass of the campaign.
But, Nayyera, when, people who've worked on campaigns, and I've worked on a couple of campaigns, the Foreign Policy Advisory Committee doesn't necessarily sit down with the candidate. This is a committee that is putting together the policy papers. Their work ends up in the speeches. They don't have to be in day-to-day contact with the candidate themselves to be important figures. And in the case of Papadopoulos, there's New York Times has some of the emails that he sent to Stephen Miller, who I don't think they would argue is a marginal figure. He's now writing Trump speeches. He's a White House advisor. The day before he learned about the hacked emails, the New York Times, right, Mr. Papadopoulos emailed Mr. Miller, then a senior policy advisor to the campaign, saying Mr. Trump had an open invitation from Mr. Putin to visit Russia. The day after, he wrote Mr. Miller that if he had some interesting messages coming in from Moscow about a trip when the time is right. You've worked in the State Department. Would it be normal for a marginal figure, aka a coffee boy, to be able to provide that kind of potential, at least offers of access?
Absolutely not. But exactly as you mentioned about the Bush League fashion, you could have very junior staff have very high-level access, and we saw that translate into the White House as well, where prior to General Kelly arriving as chief of staff, pretty much anybody in the White House was able to walk in and get an Oval Office meeting and make themselves heard with Donald Trump.
Yep.
This is clearly something that Putin and his KGB-like friends are aware of, and this is why they targeted these specific people in order to be able to get access to the White House. And now we're going to see how far this goes. I think the broader question in the context of this Asia trip, in which Donald Trump sat down with Putin and had the one-on-one meetings and walked away saying, oh, well, I asked the guy, and he said, no, we did not interfere in your election, and I absolutely believe him. We're starting to understand, because of the Mueller investigation, why it is that Donald Trump is He's never going to insult Putin. It's probably the only person he will never insult in this world. And why it is that he's so ready to believe anything that Putin and Russia say, that's at the core of the American public wanting to understand what the collusion is, because this is a unprecedented friendliness and being cozy with not just Russia, but an actual adversary.
Well, you've called it up, so let me go ahead and play what you're talking about. What Nair is talking about is Donald Trump's, while he's on this trip in Asia, he was asked about Russian interference in the election, and here he is trying to square the discrepancy between whether or not the American intelligence agencies who work for Donald Trump are right, or whether Putin is right when he denies that he interfered in our election. Here's Donald Trump.
As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies. I've worked with them very strongly. There weren't 17, as was previously reported. There were actually 4. But they were saying there were 17. There were actually 4. But as currently led by fine people, I believe very much in our intelligence agencies.
The little number discrepancy he's trying to do there is that there's the CIA, there's the NSA, there's the Directorate of National Intelligence, and under the Director of National Intelligence there are other agencies. So he's trying to sort of reduce the number of agencies in the federal government that all agree that Vladimir Putin's Kremlin was involved in interfering in our election. But here's what Donald Trump said about Putin himself, and when he talked to Putin, what he believes about what Putin said.
I'm surprised that there's any conflict on this. What I said there is that I believe he believes that, and that's very important for somebody to believe. I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election.
Masha, I feel like the thing that is that all of these people have in common, whether it is Carter Page, whether it is George Papadopoulos, or whether, frankly, it's Donald Trump, is this real sort of almost, childlike faith in Vladimir Putin. Essentially, all of these people believe they can sit down with Putin, get him to get into a room with Donald Trump, that the things he says are authentic, and that he's somebody that they all clearly were very eager to work with. That obviously, is that what Putin's sort of upper hand here was that he had so many people who were eager to be friendly with him?
I think you're right to say the word eager. I don't think that this has anything to do with authenticity, right? I don't think that anybody, including Donald Trump, is actually thinking that Putin is telling the truth, right? Because we're not talking about collusion here. He actually asked Putin, or he supposedly asked Putin about meddling in the election. Meddling in the election is not in question, right? The intelligence agencies agreed he meddled in the election. Russian investigative reporters have shown that Russia meddled in the election. I mean, this has been shown beyond any shadow of a doubt, unlike collusion, which can, we still don't know whether that can be proved or not. So when Trump says that Putin didn't meddle and that he believes Putin, he's really talking about power, right? He thinks that Putin has the power to claim that he didn't meddle in the election, even though it is obviously not true. Just as Trump lies to show power, so he sees Putin lying to show power, and he sort of acknowledges that power, and he gives him more power than he's giving to American intelligence agencies.
Yeah, clear. And it's also, Natasha, clearly also, if there is a quid pro quo that one can sort of surmise from what we know so far in the Russia investigation, it does feel like on the Russian side of that alleged potential transaction, sanctions were at the core of it. This is Donald Trump then talking about sanctions. It feels like all of these meetings somehow got back to this idea of undoing the sanctions against Russia, especially the Magnitsky sanctions. And this is Donald Trump, President of the United States, talking about those sanctions. Here he is.
And, people don't realize Russia's been very, very heavily sanctioned. They were sanctioned at a very high level. And that took place very recently. It's now time to get back to healing a world that is shattered and broken.
And Natasha, in your reporting, were these, whether they want to call them low-level people or not, it feels like that the offer that maybe they were attempting to put on the table was openness on changing or even getting rid of these sanctions.
Right, and what's interesting is that Trump's first meeting with Vladimir Putin, well, actually his second meeting that he had at the G20 during that dinner, he said later on that Putin actually mentioned the Magnitsky Act sanctions. He said they talked about adoptions, and it was very interesting. And then we find out that, they had this meeting at Trump Tower where they talked about adoptions. sanctions, which is another code word for the Magnitsky Act sanctions. So it seems clear that at the core of Russia's outreach to the Trump campaign, they were offering some kind of dirt on Hillary Clinton in exchange for a promise or some kind of commitment that the administration, the White House, would then look into removing these sanctions, because that is a #1 foreign policy goal of Vladimir Putin's. He hates the Magnitsky Act sanctions. He's been trying to undo them since 2012. And of course, he did ban Americans from adopting Russian children in retaliation for those sanctions. So that is a huge priority for him, and it makes total sense why this would be at the top of his list in reaching out to the Trump campaign and seeing what their reaction would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Aslan, you have Carter Page, who's on record being very much against the sanctions. You have George Papadopoulos, who, he's calling himself low level, but he's there trying to broker a meeting with Vladimir Putin. What else would it be about? We're now learning from the reporting that allegedly the reason that he was willing to lie to the FBI and risk going to prison was out of loyalty to Donald Trump. You have this, it does feel like that is what that's what we're pushing toward, right? A quid pro quo. We'll look at sanctions again, and we'll take whatever help you can give us on Hillary Clinton.
Right, and there's certainly a lot of sketchy Russia and or Putin-friendly individuals going in and out of Trump world, at least over the last 2 years or so. But when it comes to the President of the United States himself, there seems to be this ritual of people setting their hair on fire whenever he comes out and publicly says, essentially, he believes Vladimir Putin and not the U.S. intelligence agencies. I got to tell you, it would honestly be news at this point if he came out and said the opposite.
Yeah.
He believed American intelligence apparatus and not Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, because this has been his tune for over a year now, and it's a point of pride almost for him. It's not a matter of analysis or intellectually discerning what is actually going on in this particular case. It's the president not willing to back down on anything. And at this point, it just happens to deal with the Kremlin.
Yeah, and the Kremlin and Turkey and other autocratic regimes. I mean, Donald Trump clearly and his campaign team knew to surround him by people who agree with him that Putin should be our friend, who agree with him in sort of cuddling up to strongmen like Erdogan. You have Michael Flynn and his son apparently perhaps even maybe organizing a kidnapping in order to help out the Turkish government, now being investigated for that. So this feels like this idea that these were just low-level nobodies. No, these are people who are cultivated because they had a similar mindset and a similar way of viewing the world as Donald Trump.
Oh, and that's part of signing up for a campaign.
That's right.
You sign up for a campaign because you believe in what the candidate says and what they stand for. And Donald Trump is pretty basic, actually. It's a very basic, straightforward assessment of who he is. He likes strong men. He wants to be around people who can project power and who are willing to disregard rule of law. He is not have the depth that we've seen in previous administrations of understanding intellectually what rule of law means, how the Constitution works. He's made several statements about regret that the DOJ can't get involved in the way he would like them to in various operations. And that is interesting that he is ending his Asia trip with Duterte, who is somebody who has disregarded rule of law and had his police kill thousands of his own citizens without any trial. This is the type of energy and power and idea that Trump is going to come back to the United States with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you to Nayyera Haq and Aswan Suebsaeng. Natasha and Masha will be back, and their names also rhyme. And coming up, Trump is closing out his Asia trip in the Philippines, where he has plenty of conflicts of interest. Because, of course, more on that after the break.
Duterte routinely kisses his female supporters, once called the Pope a son of a all of which has earned him a reputation as the Trump of the East. Incredibly, this man is leading in the polls by 11 points, so he's probably going to get elected president tomorrow, which isn't just terrifying for the Philippines, because it means that in just a year's time, we could be treated to this as an official state visit.
Today, Donald Trump landed in Manila, where he met another of his strongman idols, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. In April, Trump praised Duterte for his war on drugs, a term Duterte seems to have taken quite literally, as thousands of people have been killed in his crackdown on the drug trade. It is unclear whether Trump will bring up any human rights questions with Duterte. But today's meeting also raises conflict of interest questions about the skyscraper Trump loves to brag about, his Trump Tower in Manila. Manila. Masha Gessen is back with me, and joining me now is Kurt Eichenwald, MSNBC contributor and contributing editor at Vanity Fair. Kurt, I'll start with you. USA Today wrote this about Donald Trump back in May. President Trump makes more money when he embraces regimes that violate human rights. From the Philippines to China and Turkey to Saudi Arabia, the president's adoration for authoritarian rulers is bad for those being oppressed, but good for his wallet. And what they were talking about was this Trump Tower Manila deal, which it's supposed to open, I think, this year. It gives, according to USA Today, it gives Duterte lucrative leverage over Trump. Trump is not just hostage to a government that could easily cost him a huge sum of money if it pulled the plug on his branding deal, but he also stands to profit more from the extrajudicial killings that he uses, as he uses the power of the presidencies to endorse them. In other words, wiping people out in parts of the Philippines enables Duterte to say, we're a safe place to do business. Your thoughts?
The arrangement in the Philippines is the greatest overlooked scandal of many of the Trump administration. I mean, you have a situation right now that is an absolute violation of the Constitution. You know, we have the special envoy to Washington from the Philippines is a man named Jose Antonio, the business partner of Donald Trump at Trump Tower Century City, which is the Philippines property, is Jose Antonio. The same man who is representing the Philippines to the American government is writing checks every year, 25%. I'm sorry, he's already paid $2 million to the Trump family. When this place opens, he's going to be writing 25% of the revenue of this building is going to be going into the pockets of the Trump family. During the campaign, Don Jr. and Eric went out there. They were hanging out with Jose Antonio. You had Ivanka, who was selling her jewelry and is going to be selling her jewelry in this building. I mean, you have a situation here. You know, this is straight out of what Hamilton wrote in Federalist 68 about the dangers of foreign influence in the American government. You have a direct violation of the Emoluments Clause. You have a circumstance where the President of the United States is getting millions from a foreign government, and the Republican Party doesn't care. I mean, they have become a lawless organization. They're 2 steps from being a racketeering enterprise. And so when you have a situation where Duterte, who has compared himself to Hitler, who in his December 2nd phone call with Donald Trump, you know, Donald Trump supposedly told him, you're handling the drug dealing, your drug problems the right way, killing people. I mean, you know, Donald Trump, if he says, President Duterte, we stand against what you're doing, we're standing against your mass murder, then what's going to happen? Duterte will say, well, my representative to Washington is no longer going to pay you millions of dollars. It's the greatest outrage I have ever seen in government.
Yeah, and Masha, and that is because Donald Trump doesn't own the Trump Towers in Manila. It's a licensing deal with his name on it. He just gets paid to call them Trump Towers. At the same time, as Kurt just mentioned, you have Duterte using death squads to kill people, apparently planting drugs on them and then claiming self-defense a lot of the times, these death squads, and even boasting that sometimes he's done the killing himself just to show people it should be done. And yet, John Kelly, General John Kelly, who is the White House chief of staff, had a conversation with reporters in which he was asked whether or not the Trump administration would stand up against Duterte's reported human rights abuses, and he was sort of noncommittal, like, I don't know if we're going to do that. I mean, I do feel like there is a Putinization of the American government. Is that over the top to say?
No, I don't think it's over the top. And, we're almost making it sound like Trump is beholden to his relationship with the Philippines because it's a profit-making relationship for him. But actually, I think it's sort of the perfect storm for him. Duterte embodies power as Trump perceives it. Trump was just last week talking about the American law enforcement system being the laughingstock of the world. And I think what he means is that he would like the American law enforcement system to work more like the system in the Philippines, which couldn't be called a law enforcement system because it has nothing to do with law. It has to do with directly delegating violence to non-lawful agents and encouraging it, something that strongmen usually do in a coded way, but Duterte does it very openly. And that seems to appeal to Trump. I think that, to him, sort of the Philippines is perfection. It's a perfect way of making money, and it's a perfect way of asserting power.
Yeah, and Kurt, you had Donald Trump tweeting last night, when will all the haters and fools out there realize having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing? They're always playing politics, bad for our country. I want to solve North Korea, Syria, terrorism, blah, blah, blah. So it feels like he's doing a lot of things at once. But overall, the sort of bag of what he is doing is not just trying to get Americans to be more comfortable with the idea of being friendly with autocratic regimes, but would it be wrong to say that he's also trying to get the United States to be more comfortable being more like these autocratic regimes?
I think if Donald Trump had his druthers, we would be in a situation where he had direct command of Justice Department prosecutions, that he ran an autocratic regime. I mean, I have known Donald Trump since 1987, and everything of this man's character is driven towards the self and the ego. I want command, I want compliments, I want money. If you are not my ally, then you are my enemy. And if he can't have things his way, then he's upset. So he is greatly drawn to an autocracy. He is greatly going to be supportive of Duterte because Duterte has said nice things about him. That's step one. And step two is Duterte runs a government the way Donald Trump wants to. When you talk about, when he talks about Russia and Putin, I mean, Russia is waging a cyber war against Western democracies. Every other democracy, all of our allies are talking about it. All of them, no, I don't know all of them, many of them have been subjected to the same things that we were. And Trump is saying, oh, let's have a good relationship. You don't try and have a good relationship with a country that is engaged in a war against you. And that is something that is fundamentally just incomprehensible here. Is that, Masha made a great point. There's a huge difference between collusion and what Russia is doing. Collusion is now a different topic. But whether or not Russia is undermining global democracy is without question.
Yeah, I think we're out of time. I wanted to ask Masha, just if you can be very brief. Those who are noticing this sort of drift toward autocracy, very quickly, what should they do about it? What can we do about it?
Resist. But look, pay attention to judicial appointments. I think what Kurt was just talking about is Trump's very clear desire to control the judiciary, to make it a part of the executive branch. And his judicial appointments, which are speeding through the Senate, are an effort to destroy judicial culture and judicial institutions as they exist now.
Yeah. Pay attention, I think, is the watchword for the day. Masha Guest and Kurt Eichenwald, thank you both. Really appreciate it. And meanwhile, here's how Donald Trump, President of the United States, responded to apparently being insulted by the man he nicknamed Little Rocket Man, tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Oh well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that will happen!" Exclamation point. Coming up, Trump has much higher regard for another autocratic regime, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We will follow the money coming up.
A morning latte, some strategically placed needles, unicorns, and sore muscles. With the help of two very special pint-sized helpers, I finally took some time out of my busy schedule to get in the Small Business Saturday spirit and try some new businesses in my own Brooklyn neighborhood. For more, watch Your Business Weekend mornings at 7:30 on MSNBC.
Sponsored by American Express, founding partner of Small Business Saturday. Shop small on November 25th.
Proper etiquette is essential for every social occasion.
So the broom said, "Sorry, I'm late. I overswept."
Yes, even the awkward among us deserves some laughter. And while it's okay to nibble in public, a lady only dines in private.
Try the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It gives you options based on your budget.
Uh-oh. Discussing finances is a big no-no.
What? I'm helping her save money.
Shh. Men are talking.
That's it. I'm out. Taking the meatballs.
Nervous?
wonder why Europeans seem to speak so many languages? Maybe it's because we rely on old ways of learning, and they rely on Babbel, the #1 selling language learning app in Europe. Babbel's award-winning interactive technology gets you speaking right away, and best of all, remembering what you've learned.
When I started using Babbel, I really got into it.
You're able to retain all this information, remember what you learn without struggling to learn it.
Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons let you learn on the go. Now, you can try Babbel free. In just weeks, you'll have the conversational skills you want to use anywhere. In business meetings, on vacation, with the ones you love.
It's not hard to learn a language if you have the right program.
It improved my accent 1,000%.
The way that it's taught, it really sticks with you.
It's so user-friendly. I love it.
Try Babbel free today. Go to Babbel.com or download the app and see why Babbel is the #1 selling language learning app in Europe.
Us. It's what this country is made of. But right now, our bond is framed. How do we get back to us? The Y fills the gaps and bridges our divides. Donate to your local Y today. Because where there's a Y, there's an us.
The Pentagon continues to investigate the deaths of 4 soldiers killed last month in an ambush in Niger. The Washington Post is reporting new information about Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, whose remains were found separate from the other 3 soldiers who were killed, and not until 2 days after the attack. In a warning, the details are disturbing. Residents of the village near where the attack occurred told the Post that they located Sergeant Johnson's body nearly a mile away from the ambush site. When they found him, his arms were tied behind his back, and he had suffered a severe wound to the head, suggesting that Sergeant Johnson had been captured and executed. The new details came as a surprise to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who, as the family's representative and close friend, has been one of the leading voices demanding answers about Sergeant Johnson's death. Earlier today, she spoke with the Reverend Al Sharpton about how Sergeant Johnson's widow, Maisha, responded to the news.
He was executed, and so who did that? Did the militants do that? Did he walk a mile? Did they carry him a mile? Did he run a mile? Was he in a car? How did he get a mile from the battlefield? Who tied his hands in front of him? Who bounded him like that? We are just so distraught, and Maisha is just a wreck.
We're going to stay on this story here on AM Joy and continue to bring you updates as it develops.
We shot something out of the sky the other day in Saudi Arabia, as you saw, and that was a very rapidly moving missile shot out of the sky. That was a needle in the sky, and it was hit immediately and exploded without damage.
This week in Asia, Donald Trump repeatedly praised Saudi Arabia's use of an American-made missile defense system to destroy a rocket apparently launched from Yemen. Trump is never short of praise for the U.S. the U.S. ally in the Gulf, and what Saudi Arabia's crown prince calls a crackdown on corruption, and what his critics call an attempt to consolidate power by arresting his rivals. On that, Trump tweeted, quote, "I have great confidence in King Salman and the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. They know exactly what they are doing. Some of those they are harshly treating have been milking their country for years." And joining me now, Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin, MSNBC anchor Ayman Mohyeldin, and foreign policy analyst Rula Jibril. I'm going to start with you, Ayman, on this because that crackdown by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, it struck a lot of people as sort of odd timing. Was the timing coincidental to the fact that you did have, the very good friends of that regime, Jared Kushner, apparently spending quite a bit of time with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and had just been there about 10 days before? Are those two things coincidental or not?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it caught everyone by surprise, and certainly a lot of people I've spoken to in the Gulf did not see it coming. But what they have seen is a systematic pattern by the young Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia moving more and more in this direction. He had been moved from Deputy Crown Prince to Crown Prince. He had been increasingly in charge of more issues involving the kingdom, including security, defense, the war in Yemen, and ultimately taking over more of the economic vision for that country. So people were predicting that some kind of consolidation of power was going to happen. How it was was going to look like, still up in the air, but we got an answer about that over the past couple of weeks. Interestingly, though, to your point, Joy, the question about whether or not the United States knew about this in advance, and I think from some of the early indications we had, they were probably given some kind of heads up. No indication that it was going to be this wide in scope, or maybe they didn't know who exactly the individuals that were going after, that the Crown Prince was going after, who they were going to be. But it's hard to imagine, with the close relationship that the Saudis have established with the Trump administration, with Jared Kushner in particular, the fact that he's already been there 3 times this year alone, I think there were some clear signals that the United States probably gave a wink and a nod for this consolidation of power. And it's certainly something the young Crown Prince would need from the United States if he is at some point to move into the line of being the king of that country, which there's a lot of speculation that is something could happen.
And, you know, Jennifer, and I think that is the key, right? This is a very close ally of the United States. Obviously, there's that oil relationship. You have Saudi Aramco about to, you know, sort of make itself a public offering. Donald Trump said publicly he would like that to be on the New York Stock Exchange. Politico reported that Jared Kushner took an unannounced trip to Saudi Arabia on October 25th through the 28th, accompanied by the Deputy National Security Advisor, Dina Powell, and Middle East envoy, Jason Greenblatt. In your paper, in the Washington Post, David Ignatius wrote it was probably no accident that last month Jared Kushner, Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, made a personal visit to Riyadh. The two princes are said to have stayed up until nearly 4 a.m., several nights, swapping stories and planning strategy. Is it possible, or is it likely, in your view, that the Saudis would institute such a widespread crackdown without giving a heads up to the United States?
I think it's very unlikely, and it's very disturbing that Jared Kushner, who is not in the State Department, who has this floating job, who is responsible to no one other than the president, goes and has conversations of which the State Department is not aware, of which the National Security Council, though Dina Powell was there, doesn't say that she was there until long into the night talking to him. Very disturbing that he may have given the go-ahead. And, you know, there's a couple models that Saudi Arabia is looking on, and right now they're going to choose the China model. They want to economically advance, they want to open up, but politically they want to crack down.
Right.
And they're getting a signal from the United States, that's okay with us. That's a big mistake for us, that's a big mistake for the region.
And I will say, before I go to Religion Bill, that the NBC News was given a statement regarding the Kushner visit, that U.S. and foreign officials told NBC News the two men discussed Kushner's efforts to broker an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians and discussed curbing Iranian and Hezbollah aggression against Israel. That's the official line of what they talked about. But Rula, I want to talk to you about what Foreign Policy magazine described as sort of a Putinization of the Saudi regime, that the Saudi regime is sort of acting in ways that are a lot more sort of Putin-like. You've written quite a bit. You are very conversant with the region. Would you describe that as sort of an accurate assessment of what's happening in Saudi Arabia?
I would say yes, and I would add it's a Balkanization actually of the Middle East. You know, this Crown Prince has been moving in a very aggressive way for, I would say, the last year and so. Look at what his track record. Basically, we have a war in Yemen that is becoming a human catastrophe with people who are dying of cholera for the first time. He's imposing a blockade on them. Then he is punishing his neighbors, Qatar, and imposing blockade on them. Then he's not happy with that. He lost basically the Sunni, basically lost the war in Syria. Iran won that war. He lost influence in Iraq, and now he's trying to use the Lebanese, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, he's detaining in his own country and forcing him to resign. And basically, he's willing to go to the extent of creating a mess and basically a conflict in Lebanon in order to assert his power somehow. What we are seeing, and this is the most disturbing part, we don't know what he talked about with Jared Kushner, who is the embodiment of basically American nepotism. We don't know if he talked about 666 Fifth Avenue, which is troubled real estate in New York, or he really talked about, nobody believed in the Middle East that he talked about the peace process. He doesn't care about the peace process. Not only that, whatever meeting he had with the Palestinians, they came out saying, well, he's repeating the same talking points of Prime Minister Netanyahu. What we are seeing, and this is really the disturbing pattern, we're seeing an aligned Kushner, Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed in the Emirates, and the Israelis. And the Lebanese are actually preparing for some kind of aggression, a military aggression. We know that Hezbollah, the leader of Hezbollah, he gave a talk on television. He said that they're ready for any eventuality. He even went as far as saying, we don't want any conflict. And he said that basically all the special forces are back and they're in a state of alert in Lebanon. The president of Lebanon, who's basically a Christian, asked the prime minister to come back. He's almost begging him, it's like, come back. But we know that the Saudis, who forced him to resign on their state television, which is Al Arabiya, they forced him to speak in certain kind of language that is not the kind of language that the Lebanese politicians would use. This is a language that is typical of a Saudi dialect, as if you are a British diplomat and you're speaking with a Texan accent. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So what we are seeing, some kind of bullying of this young prince trying to assert. There's no way he can make an economic reforms without political reforms. And if the political reforms are the one we're seeing basically another conflict and a breakdown of the Middle East. We don't need another country that is basically another failed state. And this is where we're heading.
And you know, Ayman, you know, we've been talking today, you know, in just looking at in the Trump administration, there seem to be several places in the world, you know, we just talked about the Philippines, where there is this, at least from the optics of it, this conflict between the, you know, interests of the United States that are being promoted by the administration in theory, and the personal pecuniary financial interests of the Trump administration seem to dovetail. In the Philippines, he's got a Trump Tower in Manila. He's got interests in Turkey that seem to make him warmer toward the Erdogan regime. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, the questions about Jared Kushner have been raised before. Bloomberg wrote a report in October about 666 Fifth Avenue, which Rula just brought up, being in deep financial trouble. And it said before joining the administration, Jared Kushner met with executives from the Chinese company Anbang from South Korea to pitch, Anbang and South Korea to pitch the grand reimagining of the tower. Kushner company's executives also approached investors in Saudi Arabia, France, Israel, and Qatar. And we know, apart from your reporting, that Qatar wound up finding itself on sort of the wrong side of the United States and Riyadh. And so the question is whether or not those interests dovetail. And we did attempt to get some answers from the White House just about the Kushner visit. And we put some questions on the table. I'm going to put them up on the screen. We asked what was Jared Kushner doing in Saudi Arabia approximately 10 days before several Saudi princes were arrested as part of an anti-corruption probe there. We asked, was 666 Fifth Avenue discussed with any Saudi official during the visit? Has Jared received any offers or actual assistance, refinancing, or selling the building? Has Jared Kushner initiated any contracts related to the refinancing or sale of the building? So far, we have not been able to get answers from this, to these questions from the White House. Do you have any reporting that suggests that there may be any of these interests that are being discussed when Jared is in the region?
It's very hard to determine that right now because officials on the other side are also acutely aware of how that would play out in the West if, in fact, there was any kind of suggestion that Saudi officials or any officials in the region were somehow engaged in a quid pro quo with an American official like Jared Kushner for family business benefits, if, in fact, down the line, he was going to turn to any of these officials to bail out his personal, family problems here in New York or elsewhere. But this is the issue that government ethics lawyers have been flagging now for the past year. There are so many red flags with the way this Trump administration has been carrying out business, and because there are so many business ties between key parts of the world that the United States is heavily invested in. So you look at a place like the Gulf states, including the United Arab Emirates, where Trump has Gulf resorts. You look at places like Saudi Arabia, which is about to put its Aramco listing on a possible stock exchange market in the West, perhaps even New York. And we know that Trump wants that to come here to New York. So it doesn't necessarily have to be so clear as for him to sit across the table and say, do this for us, we're going to do this for you. But the bottom line is the Saudis speak Mr. Trump's language, and the long line down the road is really where we're going to have to watch very closely to see if there is a quid pro quo of some sorts for financial benefits, either for the Trump family, the Kushner family, or in the long run for the U.S.
And Rula, you've written before that Donald Trump is the Silvio Berlusconi of the West, Silvio Berlusconi, the former leader of Italy. From the Saudis' point of view, do his interest, his financial interests, and how openly he touts them, is that somebody that they would then, just in terms of the history of the way Saudi Arabia deals with foreign leaders, say, okay, this is the way we can deal with this guy. He's got money on the table. That's the way to deal with him.
This is what the Saudi have been doing all along. The Emiratis, the Saudis. This is a kind of transactional foreign policy that they're thriving thrive on. So basically, the State Department and the Pentagon are telling us that what's happening basically with the Saudi is red flag, is dangerous. It might undermine our national security, our foreign policy. However, Trump is going ahead with that. So my prediction, exactly like I predicted Trump victor in 2015, exactly like Berlusconi, he's a mass manipulator, basically. All of these tweets are weapons of mass distraction because the real issue will be corruption. This is what we need to focus on. Follow the money. We need, you know, he even bragged after the election that Sajwali, somebody from the Emirat, went to him and he said, I'm willing to bribe you with $2 billion. Remember, that was President Trump talking about somebody trying to bribe him. So what we know, we can't know anything because his tax returns we cannot see, and he didn't put his asset in a trust, in a trust. So we don't know anything about these things. But this is what we need to focus on as Americans.
Yep. And I think, well, I wish we had a Congress that would focus on it. Jennifer Rubin will be back at our next hour. Ayman Mohyeldin, Rula Jibril, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And coming up in our next hour, the conservative media ties itself in knots trying to defend Roy Moore. And Donna Brazile will be here to discuss her explosive new book on the 2016 election. You do not want to miss that. More Enjoy after the break. Well, Tuesday was a very good night for Democrats, and joining me now to discuss the future of Virginia and the Democratic Party's Virginia Lieutenant Governor-elect Justin Fairfax. Thank you for being here. Congratulations.
Thank you, Joyanne. God bless you. Thank you for having us on.
Great. Congratulations. So you, the victory was pretty sweeping for Democrats. I was just asking you in the break, there were still some outstanding assembly seats that will determine control of that body. Right. Where does that stand?
Yeah, so there are 3 races still outstanding. We have some great Democratic candidates who showed up, and one is only 12 votes separating the 2 candidates. And so we will know more a little bit later, but it was an incredible night on
As of now, you guys are ahead 49-48.
That's correct.
Okay,
that's correct.
We'll see how that comes out. Now, your victory was not without controversy, I will say. Not only I was telling you in the break that a lot of black people I know were tweeting, we need to know what's happening with Fairfax as your race closed a little bit later.
Right.
But there was also some controversy ahead of time. You were left off some of the flyers that Northam put out. Doug Wilder went so far as to refuse to endorse Northam and to complain that, you know, that basically they were trying to hide you, the only black candidate up for statewide office, under a bushel in order to get white voters. What did you think of that?
Yeah, well, first, as regards Governor Doug Wilder, he is a political hero of mine and a friend, and I talked to him the other day, and I was honored to have his support in this election. Of course, it was historic for many reasons. This is only the second time an African-American has been elected to statewide office in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I follow in some incredible footsteps. And you're right, there was some controversy during the campaign, but I think every time that there was an issue and, you know, we were, whether us being left off or someone attacking us, I think we rose above it. And I think that's why we got, you know, 1.36 million votes in that election, the most ever for a lieutenant governor. And so, you know, I think we're entering a new era of politics, a new era of hope. People are tired of the politics of personal attack, and they had a choice on Tuesday. We had the other side that was trying to take us down a very dark political road, and people chose hope over fear. They voted their aspirations and not their anxieties, and I think that that's why we ended up sweeping all 3 statewide races, having huge gains in the General Assembly, and making some history. There's incredible diversity now in our General Assembly. I think that's the era that we're entering in Virginia.
Yeah, there were some pretty historic races. African-American women turned in 91% to 8 with that highest percentage voting, and I'm sure that didn't hurt you. I'm sure that helped you a lot. Do you think that what happened in Charlottesville wound up influencing the election? I mean, Gillespie essentially ran on a neo-Confederate almost platform. Do you think that was the difference, that Charlottesville made the difference in a lot of ways?
You know, I think it brought the choices in this election into very specific relief. It showed people that they could choose either darkness over light, and what they chose was the bright light of hope. And Charlottesville really was an opportunity for people to see what the choices were that were at stake on Tuesday. And so, you know, the whole ticket on the other side really campaigned on that same kind of platform. And I'm so excited that Virginians are leading the way. As I said on election night, Virginia is the match that sparks the wildfire of progressive change all across the country. And that's because the people really are in a place where they want to choose more hopeful politics. They want people who are helping us to rise to the better angels of our nature. And I'm so excited about this new era in the Commonwealth and really in the country.
Well, they certainly got somebody positive in you, sir. Justin Fairfax, the new Lieutenant Governor-elect. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Joyanne. Thanks for all the great work that you do.
Thank you.
We look forward to a bright new era in this country.
Thank you. We'll really appreciate that. I really appreciate it. And up next, Sean Hannity and his Fox friends defend Roy Moore. On another note, completely not positive. More AM Joy after the break.
I've been investigated more than any other person in this country. To think that grown women would wait 40 years to come right before an election to bring charges is absolutely unbelievable.
Wow. On Saturday, during this very show, Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore made his first public appearance since allegations, first reported in the Washington Post, surfaced that he initiated a sexual encounter with a 14-year-old girl nearly 40 years ago when he was 32. Moore vehemently denied the claims, blaming Democrats and establishment Republicans, comments that we aired live and which our network has continued to cover. Fox, however, did not take Moore's comments live, mentioning the story once and only very briefly that hour, and emphasizing that charges that old are difficult to prove. Now, this should come as no surprise. Fox and the conservative media have been twisting themselves into pretzels all weekend, trying to find ways to defend an alleged predator of children and teens, and to dilute claims that have put the Republican Party in an awkward position, to say the least. On Friday, Moore appeared on Sean Hannity's radio program to insist that as the father of a daughter and a grandfather to granddaughters, he did indeed care about, quote, young ladies. And then came this.
Would it be unusual for you as a 32-year-old guy to have dated a woman as young as 17?
Not generally, no. If I did, I'm not going to dispute anything, but I don't remember anything like that.
But you don't specifically remember having any girlfriend that was in her late teens even at that time?
No, I don't remember that, and I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Back with me is the Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin, and joining me now, Jonathan Capehart, also of the Washington Post, Gabriel Sherman of Vanity Fair, and Eric Boehlert of Share Blue. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to go to you first on this, Eric. You had Sean Hannity really doing his best to try to rehabilitate Judge Moore. He had a Twitter meltdown going after CNN's Jake Tapper over the weekend because on Friday, because the tweets that have been since deleted, or his tweets have since been deleted, but he was essentially trying to say that he didn't justify a relationship with an underage child, calling Jake Tapper fake Jake, because essentially on his TV show he had appeared to kind of justify what happened. What's going on at Fox? Is there a fear of boycotts happening? Why do you think that he's being so sensitive but also still defending Roy Moore?
Yeah, he's trying to split this in a weird way. I mean, he's being sensitive is being kind. So I think he's afraid of what happened to Bill O'Reilly. He's afraid of what happened to Glenn Beck. You know, Glenn Beck called Barack Obama a racist. Glenn Beck lost his show. Bill O'Reilly was proven to be sort of the sexual predator at Fox News, and he lost his show. You know, activists have gone after Hannity in the past, but they haven't had a real clear attack line like Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly. Sean Hannity defends pedophilia is a very clear attack line. If you go to advertisers with that, you are going to get a response. It is very difficult for advertisers to come back and say, we're okay with this. We like Sean. We like his program. We like his environment. So, you know, he can see the writing on the wall. This is dangerous territory for him. But look, you know, Fox News is always going to defend. Fox News mirrors the Republican Party at whatever incarnation the Republican Party is. Today, the Republican Party is this heartless, kind of soulless enterprise under Trump, and that's what Fox is. So people who expect it to have any kind of shame or any kind of decency or to step forward and say, you know, Roy Moore, you crossed a line, we're not going to find it. We're simply not going to find it because that's not their goal at this point.
Yeah, and to that point on advertisers have begun to distance themselves from the Hannity show because of their more coverage, according to The Hill. And meanwhile, there's another Fox host named Judge Jeanine Pirro who's being even more explicit in trying to defend Roy Moore. Here she is doing that.
How can this guy, and if the allegations are true, I mean, I spent my career going after sexual predators and pedophiles, trust me. But right now, it's 40 years later. I doubt there could ever even be a charge filed here. The guy has been investigated a million times, Roy Moore, apparently more than any other candidate in Alabama. Is the Republican Party destroying itself, or didn't they do enough vetting of this guy Moore?
Gabe, you know, at Fox, one would think that it would not be that hard to sort of get all of the on-air talent to understand the sort of simple equation. A sexual encounter with a child is a crime, and one shouldn't try to find ways to defend it. But you do still have hosts that are really trying to find a way to defend Moore. What do you think's going on there?
Well, Joy, you know, really what I hear from my sources inside Fox is that the network is leaderless at this point. Really, I think the best way for your viewers to think about Fox News is that the executive producer, sort of the person who runs Fox News, is actually Donald Trump. But actually inside the network, there's no boss who has the stature and the credibility that Roger Ailes did to get all of the hosts in line, I should say. So what you have is people like Sean Hannity and Jeanine Pirro programming their shows with what they think Donald Trump would want them to see on their shows. So you have kind of this muddled, mixed message where, you know, back in the Roger Ailes days, the network from morning to night would sort of operate in lockstep. And I think this Roy Moore story is an example where, on the one hand, you have large portions of the network ignoring it, trying not to cover it, and then you have hosts like Hannity and Pirro kind of doubling down on it. So I think ultimately this is just another example of the network in service of Donald Trump.
Let me turn to my Washington Post panel that's here at the table. You know, Jonathan, you know, the other person that you may want to say is programming Fox News is Breitbart, because they have to compete with Breitbart's media operation and messaging, which is a lot more unabashed about, you know, just slavishly being devoted to Donald Trump in the same way, and a lot more aggressive about it. Well, I don't know if they're more unabashed. They might be on equal footing there. But here's Steve Bannon on his radio show, which he apparently does while watching CNN and this show sometimes. Talking about Roy Moore and who he thinks is out to get Roy Moore.
This is about destroying Roy Moore. And you know why they want to destroy Roy Moore? They want to destroy anybody that will step up and speak in your behalf. You know what our response is? Bring it. Bring it. You have not seen anything yet. You think we're going to back down 1 inch? You are dead wrong, folks. Paul Singer, write this down. And you and these Republican scumbags, and that's what you are, you operatives. And here's the good news, folks. We know your names, and more importantly, folks, we know your clients.
Jonathan, of course, Paul Singer is the person who has the Washington Free Beacon, the investor behind the Washington Free Beacon, which, of course, paid for the original Steele dossier, which they're very upset about because it's got all sorts of salacious stories about Donald Trump in it.
And Paul Singer also has very deep pockets, so I'm sure Singer is thinking, oh, what, bring it, Stephen? Okay, fine, I'm ready for it. But look, Steve Bannon is saying that folks are going after Roy Moore because he's speaking in your behalf. So you mean old men who have dates with teenage girls? Is that who they're defending? Look, you know, Joy, this whole thing is so otherworldly that the Republican Party, I thought I knew, the Republican Party, that the Republican Party told me for 3 decades, at least since Reagan, who they were: evangelicals, God-fearing, upright, moral, all of those things, is now suddenly thrown out the window with the election of Donald Trump as president. And now people who are twisting themselves, as you said, into pretzels to defend a guy who he keeps saying in the thing that or in the Washington Post story, it says that he would pick up the dates around the corner from where she lived. If the date's on the up and up, why don't you go like a true Southern gentleman to the front door, ring the bell, and greet the parents? This whole thing is just, it's one more piece of evidence of just how far the Republican Party has gotten away from the Republican Party.
And there's also a story that people who worked with Roy Moore knew that he was frequently would date teenagers, and that he was known to hang around, like, you know, I don't know, places where teenagers hang out.
Football games.
He'd be at football games. He'd be trolling the football games looking for dates. That's not unusual at all. You know, the other thing that's weird, because, right, if the point here, Jennifer, is that we must have Roy Moore because we must maintain maintain the Senate majority no matter what. Then Bannon would seem to be undermining that because his new target is not just Paul Singer, big-time Republican donor, but also the Senate majority leader. And he had some choice words for him on that radio show yesterday. Here that is.
Mitch McConnell, you're like a deer that's been shot. You're just going to bleed out, brother. You're just going to bleed out. I got you, okay? You're done. You think you're going to do that and bail on this guy? It's the Republican establishment. It's going to be proven, and we're coming after you.
You've been shot like a deer, you're going to bleed out. That guy used to work in the White House.
Yep, exactly. That's the mentality now that goes on. You have two things going on. One, you have a Republican Party, just as Jonathan said, that is devolved into true tribalism. Anything to protect the tribe. Pederasty, lying, treason, collusion with the Russians, whatever they have to do, lie, cover up, violate their own oaths, they will do because the tribe is everything. That majority is more important than keeping a child molester essentially out of the Capitol. Second thing that's going on is that Bannon is trying to remake the party in his image. He wants them all to be as crazy as he is. They're halfway there, but he really wants them. And he doesn't care if there's a majority or not. This is an ego trip for him. This is an ego trip for the president. Punish their allies, put their guys in. They have no concern about a majority. What would they do with the majority? They can't even legislate. They can't legislate when they do have a majority. So this is all about their ego and their ethos and showing who's the big guy on the block.
And let's not forget that the late Andrew Breitbart claims that what made him into a conservative was people attacking Clarence Thomas. And what was Clarence Thomas being attacked for? Sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment.
And so he started with that. So I guess at least they're consistent. Gabe, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other sort of things that are going on out there, because you have Fox attempting to have a merger with Sky, right? So that's happening at the same time that this is happening. You also have Donald Trump, apparently his administration, trying to push to intervene in the AT&T Time Warner merger, saying, well, you'd have to sell CNN in order to do that. And of course, CNN being his arch nemesis. So you have those two things happening at once. What is your reporting on those two items?
Well, Joy, the reporting that I've done is that Rupert Murdoch's media empire is actually in a vulnerable position at this point. They don't have the scale that their competitors do that have merged with these giant telecommunications companies. We, in the case of Time Warner, with the AT&T merger would allow them to reach their customers on mobile platforms in their homes. And so, according to my reporting, Rupert Murdoch said in a private setting that he was going to work behind the scenes to try to block that deal. Now, what people at Time Warner and my other sources have talked about is that they see Donald Trump's, perhaps his intervention in this deal, the Justice Department's surprise 180 on this deal, as evidence as perhaps calling in a favor on behalf of Rupert Murdoch to block a merger that we should point out Rupert Murdoch 3 years ago in 2014 tried to buy Time Warner and was rebuffed by that merger. So this is a case, I think, where Rupert Murdoch is really leaning on Donald Trump. And this is another example of why Fox News' pro-Trump coverage perhaps has much larger implications, is that, you know, this relationship perhaps will provide business dividends to Rupert Murdoch if Trump can stop this merger.
Yeah, and you know, Eric, our previous guest, Billy Jabril, has called Donald Trump America's Silvio Berlusconi. This sounds like, sort of like a merger between that and maybe, you know, Putin. You know, this idea of state-run media. You will support the president. You will support whoever it is that the party wants. You will not speak ill or report negatively on the president, or we will stop you from doing business. This sounds like sort of a dream come true for what Donald Trump's at least mentality seems to be.
Yeah, and look what the Trump administration has done previously this whole year for Sinclair Broadcasting. On the flip side, what have they done? They've cleared the decks so Sinclair can own as many stations as possible, right? All media consolidation deals are good if Sinclair is behind it. And then they do a 180 and they say, whoa, media consolidation, that's not good for us. We need CNN to get a new owner. We need CNN not to have a deep-pocketed backers who can take on the White House and things like that. So yeah, this is Putin, this is Kremlin, this is authoritarianism, and this is why Fox News obviously should not be seen as a news organization or even a media organization. Fox News, Breitbart, these are really super PACs disguised as media operations. They exist to do, as Jennifer mentioned, the tribalism. That is their only purpose at this point. Real quick, I mean, Fox News in 20 years has gone through many incarnations. If you go back during the Clinton crazy years, you would be shocked at how mundane its coverage was. You know, the Florida recount, they got crazier. 9/11, Iraq War, and now we're seeing completely derailed.
Yeah, it is remarkable to watch. Jennifer and Jonathan are sticking around. Thank you very much, Gabe Sherman and Eric Boehlert. We appreciate you guys. More AM Joy after the break.
Given these circumstances, do you think Republicans in Alabama should vote for Doug Jones, the Democratic candidate?
Jake, I think he should step aside. If not, maybe you can get a write-in candidate. Lisa Murkowski did it in Alaska. She was elected. I think she's urging somebody down there to do that. And, you know, people of Alabama have to figure it out, and I would hope that they would say, no, this is not acceptable. And maybe the party will do it. You know, pressure is mounting. We'll see what happens.
Well, this morning, Republican officials like Ohio Governor John Kasich are weighing in on the allegations that Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore initiated sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl nearly 40 years ago when he was 32. Moore has denied the allegations, but pressure is mounting on him to drop out of the Senate race. Jennifer, Jonathan, and Natasha are back with me, and joining the panel is E.J. Dionne, co-author of One Nation After Trump. And E.J., I'll go to you first and let you respond to the White House Director of Legislative Affairs, Mark Short, who was on Meet the Press this morning with our own Chuck Todd about how important this Alabama Senate seat is to the White House. Take a listen.
Is this Senate seat that important?
There's no Senate seat more important than the notion of child pedophilia, Chuck. I mean, that's the reality. But having said that, he has not been proven guilty of that, and we have to afford him the chance to defend himself.
How would he be proven guilty, EJ? It's 40 years ago.
Well, you know, the astonishing thing is that any charge against any Democrat, especially if that Democrat is Hillary Clinton, is absolutely true from the moment it is made. But any charge made against a Republican has to go through some elaborate litigation before anybody on the Republican side can believe it. And Mitt Romney, who earlier in his career cozied up to Donald Trump, said it pretty flatly. In elections, innocent until proven guilty is not necessarily the standard. And you showed that clip from John Kasich. It's remarkable. John Kasich is and was a very important conservative Republican, and he still is. But because the party has gone so off the edge, he looks like this liberal statesman now. John Kasich is not a liberal, but the party is in a very strange place. And the most disturbing thing, if I can add this, there are people actually saying better to go with a guy who was a 32-year-old hanging out with 14-year-olds than to elect a Democrat. That is how tribal our politics has become. And that should really scare everybody in our country on either side.
Yeah, absolutely. You have some people like Pat Toomey. I think he was Club for Growth, right? He sort of considered Jennifer to be sort of an ordinary sort of conservative Republican. And Chuck Todd is trying to ask him about the allegations against Roy Moore. And here is what happened. Take a listen.
You've said 40-year-old accusation twice. Why does that matter?
It matters because it just raises a question about the credibility. Look, I've said I don't find the denial terribly credible, but when someone waits 40 years before they make an accusation, you know, that raises a question itself. So it's probably not knowable, but there seems to be enough there that it's very disturbing.
Jennifer, this is a party that, Larry Craig had to resign because he touched another man's foot in a bathroom, and there was no way to prove that he had even intended to do anything. He had to go, right? I mean, I find that incredible that you have ordinary rank-and-file Republicans trying to find a way to say, well, it was 40 years ago. There's no way to know if these women are credible. Really, there are multiple allegations that he dated teenagers.
Right. And you have to understand, the Washington Post story had not only 4 women, but 30 witnesses. Do we need 60 or 80 or 100? What's the magic number that's going to convince these people? And the notion that a child who is molested has the obligation to come forth at 14 is beyond offensive. So, and to hear Mark Short say, well, relations between an adult and a child are terrible, but On the other hand, there's tax reform. Yeah. I mean, this is the mentality. It's sick. And I think even in Alabama, where you have elected officials unbelievably saying, if he did it, we still want him. Yes. They are going to humiliate themselves and humiliate the party even further if they stick with this guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Jonathan, that you now have a poll out that, take it for what you will. It's by JMC Analytics and Polling that has Doug Jones up, which I haven't seen before. I think I'd seen them tied, but this one has Doug Jones at 48-44. Is it unrealistic to think that it is possible that in a place where elected officials told Daniel Dale, the reporter, he's a Canadian reporter, repeatedly, we still would prefer more even if these allegations are true, or we just want more, we don't care? Is it possible to even think that the Democrat could win that race?
Look, in the age of Trump, all things are possible. So, Doug Jones could pull this out. But the thing that keeps holding me back is it's Alabama, and you've got elected officials on the record saying that we'll stick with him rather than the Democrat, invoking Jesus, Mary, and Joseph in a twisted way of trying to use the Bible to justify this.
And taking away her Virgin Mary status, that's what they're trying to say.
Right. And to add on to something else that Jennifer said and talking about there were 30 witnesses in the Washington Post story, the other thing that cannot be discounted and should be more important to all of these people, the 4 women are on the record. They put their names out there. Who cares that it's 40 years later? They are stepping forward now. How many stories are always complaining? Some Republicans are always complaining, well, unnamed sources, and how can we believe it? The sources are named,
on the record,
and still they won't believe it.
And I believe the woman is a Trump voter. It's not as if these are liberal. Okay, let's change direction and talk a little bit about Donald Trump. And I'm going to come to you on this, Natasha. Donald Trump was quoted in The Hill as calling the former leaders of the intelligence community hacks. He says, give me a break. They're political hacks. You look at it, you have Brennan, you have Clapper, former DNI, and you have Comey, former head of the FBI. Comey has been proved to be a liar and proved now to be a leaker. Essentially still battling against the U.S. intelligence services, having never said a cross word about Vladimir Putin. John Brennan responded, and this is what he said on CNN.
Well, first of all, he was referring to us as political hacks because he was trying to delegitimize the intelligence community assessment that was done. Jim Clapper, Jim Comey, and John Brennan did not write that assessment. It was written by the professional intelligence officers and law enforcement officers of this great country. Secondly, I feel very honored to be associated with Jim Clapper and Jim Comey in the same category. And considering the source of the criticism, I consider that criticism a badge of honor. And third, I found it particularly reprehensible that on Veterans Day, that Donald Trump would attack and impugn the integrity and the character of Jim Clapper, who served in uniform for 35 years.
And do so on foreign soil. Can you imagine a Democratic president doing that on foreign soil, attacking the leaders of the intelligence community on foreign soil, having then just said that Vladimir Putin believes he didn't do it, so that's good enough for me?
Well, this is why that walk back this morning that Donald Trump did about how he didn't say that he believes Putin, he just believes that Putin believes that he didn't hack the election, really meant nothing, because that was not the only thing that Donald Trump said yesterday. He called Comey, Clapper, and Brennan hacks. He said that the Russian investigation is just a hoax created by Democrats. So the fact that he called these directors hacks, and I think that Brennan made a really good point. He said, we didn't write the intelligence community assessment. He said these were career intelligence agency officials who spent a long time investigating Russia's election interference, and they concluded that this happened. And I would also note, this is not the first time that Russia has meddled in an election. Right. Russia essentially used the template that it did in Ukraine for the American election, and it did it very, very successfully. So for Trump to say, well, Putin believes that they didn't hack the election, I think that he's trying to create a distinction between Vladimir Putin and perhaps some rogue hackers in Russia, and he's trying to make the impression that maybe Putin didn't order them to hack the election in order to carry on with this chummy relationship that he really wants to have with the president.
Desperately wants.
It is freakishly horrifying that he would say, I believe that Putin believes it. Yeah. That his explanation, his cover-up is astounding, because he is saying that Vladimir Putin doesn't run Russia. He's saying that this was some lark if it was done, that he's really in the dark.
It was the infamous 400-pound man.
I have to make Jeff Schessel, who used to work in the Clinton White House, said, imagine John F. Kennedy saying, Nikita Khrushchev told me that there aren't any missiles in Cuba, and he believes it. What in the world would we have done with that?
Yeah, he believes it. He believes that he didn't do. Yeah, exactly. I have to make one more turn back to Alabama. I got to go back one more time because we don't talk enough, Jonathan, about the judiciary. Donald Trump has nominated a 36-year-old man who has never tried a case before. He's a lawyer that the American Bar Association has stated is unqualified to sit on the judiciary. His name is Brett Talley, a blogger who calls Hillary Clinton Hillary Rotten Clinton, and has pledged his undying loyalty to the NRA, and he's putting him on the bench for a lifetime appointment. Your thoughts?
This person should not be on the bench. This person hasn't even tried a case. This person is temperamentally unfit to be in the federal judiciary in a lifetime appointment. This is what Republicans are voting for? Can you imagine what would have happened if Obama or W or Clinton or H.W. Bush or Carter or Reagan had done anything like that?
Yes.
You can't.
Impeachment.
Well, it never would have happened.
Right. They wouldn't have done it. And EJ, you wrote One Nation After Trump. I'm going to leave it to you to explain to us, how does any of this get fixed? I mean, ultimately there will not always be a Donald Trump in the White House. And at some point, American leadership around the world will have to be restored, that he is thrown away. The American judiciary will have to recover from having real hacks on it. The American intelligence community will have to have some sort of a relationship with a future White House where they can trust one another. Is there a path back from Donald Trump that doesn't take a decade?
I think there is. I mean, we saw in the elections last Tuesday what happens when people who know that this is wrong and bad for the country start mobilizing. So I think that's a first step. I think a second step will be Republicans taking a look at what happened last Tuesday and saying, we can't leave our party like this. This is not in the long-term interest of our party. And I think, thirdly, there are a lot of people around the world who understand that a majority of Americans now, a vast majority of Americans, don't agree with Donald Trump. And so I think we're going to lose some ground here in the Trump years that will be hard to get back. But I think we can take the government back to a more reasonable place. And I think we can repair some of these relations. But we just have to acknowledge that a lot of damage is being done right now to our country and its standing in the world.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, indeed. Jennifer Rubin, Jonathan Capehart, Natasha Bertrand, EJ Dionne. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, Donna Brazile joins me live. You do not want to miss it. Go get your coffee.
Order now.
If the Democratic Party is looking to send thank you cards for its big Virginia victories, the exit polls make it pretty clear who should be at the top of their list. Black women, who lent 91% of their support to Ralph Northam. They were a key component to his win on Tuesday. And with the wind at Democrats' backs after Tuesday's election results, a focus on those key constituencies could help them drop a blueprint for a winning strategy in 2018. Emphasis on could. Because as my next guest observed in her new book, reflecting on the 2016 election, the Democratic Party has snatched defeat from the jaws of victory before. And joining me now is Donna Brazile, former chair of the Democratic National Committee and author of Hacks, the inside story of the break-ins and breakdowns that put Donald Trump in the White House. Thank you for being here.
You know what? It is a great joy to be here on AM Joy.
Yes, well, I appreciate you coming. So let's start with that last point. African-American voters really delivered in Virginia, really delivered in New Jersey. But you write in your book that in the 2016 election, Robbie Mook and the Clinton campaign didn't want to spend more money to get the Obama coalition out. Is that a fair assessment of what they did? Because I think in their point of view, they were like, the African-American voters said it was very important to them.
It was extremely important. And they understood that we had to not just mobilize the Obama coalition, but we had to ensure that they got out and similar numbers to 2012. Look, I want to first of all applaud, many of my colleagues who went out there last year to work on the campaign. The Clinton campaign was focused on 270 electoral votes. But as chair of the Democratic Party, I was focused on electing Democrats up and down the ticket. I used to say from the courthouse all the way to the White House. One of the reasons why I said early on in the book that they thought that giving the DNC chair $2 million for 10 weeks, that's not enough money, Joy. I knew we needed more resources to invest in down ballot races.
And you had some real challenges, and you write very critically of, there's an infamous character, Brandon, in the book, who was sort of the minder from the Clinton campaign, who was there to sort of watch over you, even though you were the chairman. You write in the book, in one of the more evocative passages, and there are a lot of them, that essentially your requests for money were being denied, and you were getting really frustrated. You said, all I want you to do, and this is what you're telling Brooklyn, is treat me with some respect. I said, my voice rising. I'm not Debbie, meaning Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I'm not Hannah, and I'm not Patsy the slave. Yes. Y'all keep whipping me and whipping me. You never give me any money or any way to do my damn job. I'm not going to be your whipping girl. From this time on, we're keeping the money we raise. Is that clear? Patsy is keeping her money.
Yeah, and you can imagine when I made those comments, I was frustrated. Donald Trump went into a black community and said, what the hell do you have to lose? And Joy, in my mind, I thought health care, voting rights, gay rights. I thought about all of the great progress the president had made on the economy, all of the great progress the president had made on climate accord. And my job as the chair of the Democratic Party was to advocate on behalf of Democrats up and down the ticket. And so while Brooklyn had a certain amount of control over the DNC, I did not want anyone to control the chair of the party for obvious reasons. I am a non-paid volunteer helping Hillary Clinton and Democrats up and down the ticket. That was my job.
Yeah, and you also write in the book about Clinton and black voters, one more piece on this, that all the data you wrote showed that 1% or fewer of black folks supported Donald Trump, so that vote seemed to Brooklyn to be in the bag for Hillary. No need to spend any money to court it when the poll numbers and the data points were so overwhelmingly in Hillary's favor. I knew that to be true, but there's a difference between telling a pollster that you favor a candidate and getting yourself out the door on election day and going to the polls. Are you essentially accusing the Clinton campaign of dropping the ball on the black vote and saying that that's why that she ultimately didn't prevail?
Let me tell you something. I think I'm one of a few people in this country. There are a lot more out there. I understand how to get out the vote. That was what I was trained to do. That's what I know how to do. But I can't go out there and enjoy and tell members of your family, even members of my family, let alone people that don't look like us, that I need their support, I need their help. I have no literature, I have no material. So as chair of the party, I sought to just get literature and material into the hands of people I knew would support Hillary. If you go into Little Haiti down in Florida and they say, Madam Chair, we don't hear any ads in our language. Madam Chair, we don't have any material. My job was to advocate for those voters who wanted to help Hillary Clinton win, and that's what I tried to do.
So I want to switch to this question that obviously this is the opening gambit for the book, the piece in Politico that talked about whether or not you and whether or not Bernie Sanders thought that the campaign was rigged. You write in multiple places in the book that you, in fact, believed it was not. There are several pages in the book in which you say that having looked at the election, you did not find any evidence that it was rigged, that there was no rigging. But there have been excerpts of your book that were posted and headlines that suggest that you do believe that the primaries were rigged. So once and for all, in your view, were the primaries rigged against Bernie Sanders?
I said in my book, no, I found no evidence that the process was rigged. Mm-hmm. However, what I did find disturbed me. I said it was not illegal, because it's not illegal to set up joint fundraising agreements, but it was unethical, in my judgment, to have a process by which, in exchange for bailing the Democratic Party out, because we were broke. I think Secretary Clinton said that earlier this year. We were broke, but you know what? The Democratic Party should not be under the control of any candidate until that nomination process is over. And so I went to Bernie with my findings, and I told him what I had saw, and he accepted it, because clearly I got a chance over the next few months to work with Bernie and others, including supporters of Martin O'Malley and the other candidates, to get out the vote for Hillary Clinton.
And I'll just read that passage. I think I put it up, but he said that Bernie had legitimate reasons to complain about the actions of a handful of people at the DNC, obviously what was released in the WikiLeaks dumps, and I'd been totally forthcoming to him about that. But overall, the game was not rigged against him. What at issue is this joint fundraising agreement that Hillary Clinton signed in 2015 that essentially gave her ultimately control of the party, but only if she became the nominee. And didn't all three Democratic candidates sign JFA? So if she had a JFA that would kick in should she be the nominee, and Bernie had one too, and O'Malley had one too, then how was that even unfair to Bernie Sanders?
Well, first of all, it was unfair to have a member memorandum of understanding. This was an addendum to the joint fundraising agreement. This addendum to the joint fundraising agreement gave them the control over 3 departments. And because of those, and I found no evidence, even with those 3 departments, research, tech, comms, and fundraising in a certain degree. I found no evidence that they played any role whatsoever in the primary process. But again, having your research department, I mean, you know, starting in you know, late fall of 2015, I know they were focused on Republicans. I found no evidence that they were focused on Bernie Sanders. The evidence I did find, I brought it to light. Including my own DNC emails. I mean, look, I had a DNC account, too, that was hacked.
But evidence of what? Because I think the question, and I've talked to some former Clinton staffers whose their expression is essentially, look, you know, this was a joint project together to elect Hillary Clinton, and they are expressing that, you know, it's sort of hurtful to sort of portray them as having sort of cheated against Bernie Sanders when all the rules were known 4 years earlier, and he knew what they were and he played by them, too.
And Joy, remember, I'm on the Rules Committee. And again, I could tell you as a member of the Rules Committee, we did nothing to prohibit anyone from running. Bernie Sanders could run as a Democrat because we allowed him as a party. And there were people who helped him get on the ballot in various states. Sure. But here's where I take issue with anybody who is unfamiliar with the addendum that was written.
Okay, I'm going to actually ask you to hold that answer until the other side of the break, because we're going to pay for all this. And then when we come back, I'm going to have you finish that answer. How about that? All right, Donald will be right back with us. Coming up more, and we'll talk more Alabama as well. We're going to talk Virginia. We'll be right back. In her new book, Donna Brazile recalls the moment Hillary Clinton's September fainting spell prompted her to consider invoking a rule that allows the DNC chair to work with Democratic leadership to replace a disabled nominee. Quote, I had only one choice to make, she writes. Again and again, I thought about Joe Biden. Well, now, after sitting out the election in 2016, Politico is reporting that Biden is thinking about Joe Biden as the perfect nominee for 2020. Donna Brazile is back with us. Before we get into Joe Biden, I want to finish off with this JFA question. Because the question is, if there was a joint fundraising agreement that Hillary Clinton signed, and Martin O'Malley had one, and Bernie Sanders had one, how can it be unethical even if they all had the same access to the same thing?
Because it was an addendum to the joint fundraising agreement that went into effect before the primary was over and lasted until the election was over.
And you can send a copy of that to me.
Absolutely, because if you impede the ability of the chair of a national political party, in my judgment, of doing her job in order to win elections up and down the ballot, your money should not determine or dictate where the chair of the party determine and dictate where the money is needed.
And that, I think, if you read the book, if you go through your book, the sense that I get of it is that you didn't feel that the primary was rigged against Bernie Sanders. You felt that that the Clinton campaign essentially rigged the game against you, against the chair of the DNC.
My argument in the book on this issue of the resource is that it impeded our ability to do our job as the party. The party job is not just to elect the president, which we supported 100%, but also Democrats up and down the ballot. If you're a Democrat, I've been accused, and I saw this last week, they said, well, Donna sent money to Chicago. Yes, I did. You know why? Because the DNC could send robocalls. We could send resources into Chicago. I wanted to make sure the vote was going to get out all across the country, not just in the battleground states, but the expansion states. And if Tammy Duckworth, who said, send me some robocalls, if Kamala Harris said, send me some robocalls, I did. And if Karen Carter Peterson in my beloved Louisiana said, send me some posters, everything Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, I help. You know when I go to bed at night, Joy? You know what bothers me sometimes when I can't sleep at night? I can't sleep at night because Donnie Fowler Jr., one of my staffers, said, they need 150,000 more in Michigan. I said, I don't have it. Ed Rendell said he needed 300,000 in Pennsylvania. I didn't have it. I had to go out and raise it. And then G.K. Butterfield said there's something wrong in North Carolina. I need more resources. My job as chair, I heard from everybody in battleground states, non-battleground states. And when the chair of the party has to go up to Brooklyn to get money, and then to get them to approve even my press releases, this MOU, which I did not blow up because I felt that Hillary Clinton didn't deserve this. This was an agreement between the DNC staff, who, by the way, wasn't no longer on staff, and Robbie Mook, who was. And I honored and respected Robbie Mook by not destroying that agreement.
It sounds like what you're saying is that Robbie Mook, the chair, that you blame Robbie Mook, the Clinton campaign manager, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz for making an agreement that tied your hands. Would that be a fair
I
assessment
believe
of the
that
book?
I think in the future, we should never have a separate agreement. I know the DNC was broke. I know that we still had a debt to pay off. I know that, President Obama was committed to helping them pay that debt down, along with Vice President Biden. But Hillary Clinton, let me say this again, she stepped up. She stepped up to help us raise money, and as a result of that, the campaign put the DNC on a starvation diet before I became chair. And all I said when I became chair is, fine, I'll live by this agreement. I'm not going to blow it up, which, by the way, I had to pay a lot of people until the end of the year. I wasn't getting paid. I was a volunteer. But I said, if I raise my own money, and thank God to Organized Labor and many others who stepped up to help me, if I raise my own money, no one should tell me how to spend it, because I'm raising it on behalf of the Democratic National Committee.
Last question, sort of exit question. I'm going to combine these two because we're running out of time. Number one, Joe Biden now thinking about running. It feels like there is a civil war in the Democratic Party that just will not end. It's the primary that will never end. Do you feel that you have contributed to that civil war by writing this book?
No, I hope I contribute to the healing of our party. I want us to run campaigns in all 50 states. And if my book allows us to run campaigns in all 50 states, great. If my book allows us to invest in candidates in down ballot races in Kansas and Georgia, Montana, great. If my book tell the American people we should not allow foreign government